Okay, so good evening everyone, and welcome to the second evening of our festival review of small literatures. My name is Anja Tomljenović, and tonight I will talk with our guests Leanne Ellul and Karl Schembri. So just a few words for the introduction. Karl is a poet, novelist, and journalist. He has published short stories, a novel, a collection of poetry in Maltese and in English, and also some of his poems were also published in Arabic translation. His poetry is strongly intertwined with his journalistic experience. He spent many years reporting on humanitarian crises in different countries, including Palestine, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, Jordan, and Libya. And I'm very excited to learn something about that. And Leanne writes poetry and prose and has published works for both adults and children. She was named Best Emerging Author in the 2016 National Book Prize, and her works for children have received numerous awards. Her second poetry collection, which we will talk about tonight, is called Bura. Am I saying it correctly?
Yeah, perfect.
Nice. Is part of an interdisciplinary project centered around the color white. Also, she lectures in Maltese language and literature and is active in Iniziamet and Hela Foundation. So, Karl and Leanne, thank you for joining us here in Booksina, and I'm excited to learn more about your work, your poetry, and your literary views. So yesterday we heard that Malta has changed profoundly in the last few decades as far as the political, social, and cultural situation is concerned. So it became a part of the EU. A new generation of writers has emerged. Women write a lot and create spaces for themselves. The relationship with the body was changed, which is also significant, and there are many new themes that are being constantly explored. So Maltese literature is relatively young, and maybe we can start with how do you see that literary tradition and the space your poetry occupies? And do you feel connected with it at all? And how would you describe your position in the opposition of tradition? It kind of rhymes, I don't know.
I have to remember all these questions, and I'm not good at it at all. First of all, thank you, and thank you, Anja, for preparing all these questions. I think that despite sort of our short linguistic history, sort of literature made great leaps. At first it sort of started out slow, but then it was like a snowball effect. We caught up with the rest of the world, so to say. I think we still have to grow and explore new themes, and yesterday we even mentioned we don't have full-time authors, for instance, and in that regard I think some topics that need to be tackled with sort of through literature sort of take a back stand when ideally our authors are talking about these topics through their literary works as well, making a comment about them through their literary works. So in this sense, there are a lot of topics, a lot of styles, a lot of themes that we still have to delve into. But despite that, I think we have a very healthy scene, and even speaking about women authors, for instance, I think we also have a very good relationship between us. And most of the time we help each other, even in finding and strengthening our own voice. And that, I think, is something really positive. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think about this?
Well, I
I've been living away from Malta for the last 14 years, so Leanne is much more conversant on what's going on as Adrian was yesterday. I see myself in a small but strong tradition of authors who are journalists and somehow documenting or having strong opinions about what's going on around them. We have in the 20s one of my favorite authors in Malta called Gioelea Galea came up with what is a masterpiece in my opinion of satire but also very scathing criticism of Maltese society. And he was also a journalist, but also encyclopedic in his approach. He was one of the first to write about how pregnant women, helping them to prepare. So this was quite revolutionary. And he was an outsider. He died in very mysterious circumstances, and he's definitely an inspiration. But I humbly also look at international authors who are in that tradition of being informed by the reporting, the daily grind, the journalism, which I think defines me a lot, and then using that as fodder, as the ammunition, if you like, to have something to shoot back, and we might go more in depth into it. But for me, creative writing, both prose and poetry, are also a way of coming to terms with realities that I'm trying to portray as facts. But I know that in spite of saying all those facts, are not probably going to lead to some form of justice. I firmly believe that literature is what we need when facts stop telling us the truth. And by that I mean that I can fill this room with files about Palestine, about Yemen, Sudan, what's going on, and you might still not give a shit about what I'm telling you and keep your position. Because you will bring out some other statistic, some other fact, or a non-fact, and stay in that. And I think that's where literature, good authentic literature, and don't ask me what that is, but I think good literature at least puts you in someone else's shoes and makes you feel something, which facts are not capable of doing. I've lived in Palestine, and I've seen people who are totally unmoved by my reporting, which is irrelevant, but so much that is documented. It's one of the most covered crises in the world. We can talk about Somalia, which is uncovered and is neglected, but Palestine is something which everyone has heard of, but also everyone possibly has an opinion about, and very hard to move. I can tell you, all these facts show this is apartheid, and you could tell me, the Israeli Jews have a right to exterminate the Palestinians, and we will keep our positions. I think good literature will make you feel outraged, love, hatred, disgust, something, which might still keep you in your position, but at least makes you feel something. So I don't know where I fit, in which tradition I fit, but this is my view, which on a personal level then pushes me, or rather helps me. I think it's also a way of me coming to terms with the realities I see and try and do them justice. Because beyond the reporting, there are people who have trusted me with their stories and their voices. Once I tell the story in a factual way, as a journalist in reporting, and I'm now, for the last few years, I've been media advisor with a refugee agency. So I meet a lot of refugees fleeing from conflict, atrocities, climate change, and a lot of people who don't know me and trust me with their stories, and I tell them. And their voices still come back to haunt me, because just telling their stories is not enough. It's not making the world a better place, anyway. And poetry, writing, creatively, prose, whatever, but poetry mostly, helps me try and come to terms and give them a different push, a different take a different take. When I'm rushing to get a story out, well, there is the attention. Let's say last April, Sudan erupted. The whole country went on fire. That was when there was a very short window of media attention, and that's where you have to run against time to get their stories out, because that attention will last at most a week or two. And after that, I'm on my own, and I'm still hearing those voices, those people I've talked to, and that's when the penny drops for me, because I've done my job somehow, but nothing has changed anyway, and I'm still listening to them, and I need to somehow do them justice, at least for me, selfishly. I'm not saying I'm doing any justice, but giving their voices another platform which is more nuanced, more human than just the rush against tight deadlines. So that's one part of I think an important part that describes my poetry beyond the prose and the rest of my writing.
If I may add to what Karl is saying, I think in the Maltese scenario there's sort of, as I see it at least, there's a divide between prose and poetry, in the sense that I think poetry has moved forward and experimented even with language much more than our prose did and is doing. I don't know why is that. Maybe prose needs an author to stay with it longer. I'm not saying that poetry doesn't, but it takes a different mindset, I think, to write prose and poetry. In this regard, I'm a bit skeptical when people say we need to protect language. In this sense, I feel that protecting the language would put it sort of, would give it sort of an archaic viewpoint, or like you cannot touch it, you cannot use it. I mean, as I see it, we need to use language. We need to make it work. We need to experiment with it, to take it further. And with regards to myself being a woman writing in this Maltese scenario, I don't think a lot about that. I write. That's what I do. And I am a woman. Of course, I have my struggles personally and in Malta and in the world in general, but I write. And yeah.
Now, as you mentioned, the division between prose and poetry, it's really interesting. Do you feel that division exists in terms related to languages? Because you both write or translate in both Maltese and English, and I'm curious to know how does languages shape your point of view, or in what language maybe do you think and write, and how do you see the language in that terms of your personal writing?
I mean, Maltese is what comes natural to me, It's my idiom. I spoke Maltese since forever, And I feel that somehow I am, by writing in Maltese, I am contributing something to the general picture. So that is what comes natural to me, and that is I like to say Maltese is how I love, it's how I eat, it's how I sleep. It's my mode of expression, dream. Of course there's English, and sometimes I write in English, but I do it in order sort of to push myself further, not to get stuck in Maltese and maybe get stuck in my own ways. So when I use English, sometimes I use it sort of to push myself further and to make myself think in another language. And by thinking in another language, I would be writing something new, maybe.
Yeah, to make a distance, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, for me it's been a bit different. I've always written in Maltese until I fell in love with someone who was not Maltese, and then. So
love changes everything.
Yeah, for a while it did, and
okay.
So it was all of a sudden, and I've been living abroad, right? So I was using more English in my daily life. But also for 12 years I've lived in Arabic countries, Palestine, Jordan, but also traveling in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria. And so, yeah, the love made me also almost automatically, and something that I never thought I would do. It just happened. I'm not sure they're my best writings, but I wrote for a while, and I still do, creatively. But at the same time, the Arabic language, and yesterday Adrian talked a bit about it, the Arabic really, learning, I studied Arabic, and then also living it day to day gave me a new perspective about Maltese, my own language, and it was fascinating, opening doors to all the possibilities that we took for granted in Maltese, and how the roots are there, and it's up to you. It's like having a whole Lego playground, and then it's really up to you what you make of it. And then poetry, of course, that's beautiful, even more than in prose, I think. So yes, I mostly still write in Maltese. Arabic really gave me that fresh and refreshing look on my own language, almost discovering something that was always in our house, in our kitchen, and all of a sudden realizing you have a little treasure trove that you could make so much out of it.
So I would ask you something now about your poetry, because I feel that you both have a strong sense of empathy and solidarity in your poetry, but maybe from a slightly different perspectives. Karl, you write from the standpoint of a journalist when you were involved in reporting about humanitarian crisis, refugees and migrants. And Leanne, you have, as I said, a slightly different position because you work a lot with young people, students, and maybe also with other groups without certain privileges. So I can feel a strong background of empathy and solidarity in your poetry, and that's what I like a lot. And I would ask you to talk a little bit about that approach. How do you turn real-life experiences into poetry? And also, Karl, you mentioned something about being authentic. Can you be authentic, original in poetry? Are those the same terms? And maybe you can elaborate a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think authenticity is actually the most important value here. probably even more than solidarity and empathy when we're talking about literature. To me, it doesn't really matter if you're dealing with a character who is a cannibal, a serial killer, a pedophile, or a refugee, frankly. As long as what you're writing is authentic. And by authentic, I mean you know what you're writing about. How do you get to know? Through many ways, through your experience, through research, through reading. And a huge part of authenticity is being disinhibited. This is art, this is literature. This is where there have to be no barriers. And you are answerable to yourself. And you have to look in the mirror and say, yes, this is what I saw this character to be, or this poem as it should turn out to be, without any other considerations of, how will my neighbor take it, or will I get funding for my next book, or will I get invited to Croatia if I write this? So I'm simplifying, but these are, I think, the ingredients of authenticity. Of course, my personal choices are with, speaking about marginalized people, but it's not a recipe for what literature should be. That's my personal choices. I'm in the process of finishing a novel about a pedophile priest, so the question to me is not, is this the right subject? The question is, am I portraying this in an authentic way? Is this real? And again, we're using big words, but is this the experience that someone would go through if they went through this story? So I'm interested in all sorts of subjects, characters. I want to read about Nazi generals and their dilemmas, because nobody is just evil. There are moments where they have their children, they love them. So, what was your question again?
I'm just thinking empathy. About what
empathy.
You're saying.
Yeah. I think empathy is an important value which is part of my toolbox, if you like, or part of me, but it's not the only thing that makes literature. I think there's the authenticity is more important for me. Having authenticity leads to better empathy, then yes, then that would make a better literature product, literature work, literally artistic work. That's what I think.
I'm really happy Karl is mentioning the word authenticity, because I had whole arguments with our friend Gioelea about authenticity. And I'm still forming my ideas about this topic, so to say. But all I can say is that when I hear certain poets, when I read certain poetry, I feel there's authenticity. And I know that by feeling I'm not stating anything, you might feel something, I might feel something completely different. But there are some poets, who touch me in particular ways. And I think that's because they are being authentic. I always like to say that, and I always suggest even to my students, I don't know if you can teach creative writing. I never say I teach creative writing. I always say let us share our experiences through creative writing. And I always like to tell them, and to keep it to myself as well, write about something that punches you in the stomach. Write about the thing that doesn't let you sleep at night, that makes you wake up in the morning, that makes you love, that makes you think and dream, like we were saying. And when I think about what I write, I like to think that I'm dealing with something that isn't restricted sort of to that particular poem or to that particular work. For instance, my first novel for youths, to sum it up in one word, was about anorexia. But I don't think it was about anorexia to a certain extent. It was about control, it was about restricting oneself, it was about having power over something. It was about so many other things. And these many other things, they're not just there in a novel for youths, they're not just there in relation to anorexia, they are the things that make us human, they are the things that maybe made us come here tonight together, you know?
Just to add, Hemingway tells authors to work close to the bull. That is, a matador needs to work close to the bull, which means you work close to what you know. Like you need, I think this is part of the question of authenticity. You write about what you know or get to know, but also being close to the bull means it's a risky venture, because the bull can hit you, and you know, and I'm in no way condoning bull killing and bullfighting, but I love this metaphor of the author working close to the bull, which is what he knows best, but also what can kill him and what is risky, and I love that image.
But I still would like to think, like, for instance, you, Karl, if you had to write about anorexia, maybe you would be able to do it because in one particular instance in your life, you had those heightened emotions that a person going through anorexia would, for instance. So I don't think we should just write about what we've been through, but what shakes our core. I don't know how to put it, maybe.
I think knowing about something, knowing something is not necessarily going through it.
Exactly.
There are many ways of being close to that. Totally.
Yeah, I mean, writing in the end is also kind of exercising empathy in a way. When you write, when you're close to your subject, I mean, you try to like convey, their.
It's also a great way of being different characters and personalities without having to go to a psychiatrist. Really. So I can be multiple personalities when I'm writing and immersing myself in a character that I'm writing about, both in poetry and in prose. It's a great way of being someone else. And I'd be driving and thinking, how would this person react right now if I just had a car crash, or if someone just crossed the road and I almost killed them, So it's for me it's also a beautiful exercise of imagination and being beyond myself. Because God forbid we just write about ourselves. That would be too limiting and restrictive.
I think one of the sayings about authors is that they are pretty boring people, so they need to imagine their lives in the shoes of their characters or something. Karl, I would say in our anthology you are the most political poet, if I can say it in that way. So you question the morality of society in Malta, condemn nationalism and different kind of mythologies. Also deeply troubling and challenging circumstances faced by refugees and migrants. And you mentioned that already tonight, but it's really interesting, and I would like to know more about the censorship of your novel called Killer's Manifesto. It was censored in 2007 by the University of Malta because it seems too offensive. So maybe if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Right, so it was published, so it wasn't censored as a book itself, and although it was challenging to find a publisher, and actually it was, the first edition was published by a very newcomer to the publishing scene that had just, it was my newspaper editor who, I had given up on finding a publisher, and I gave him a copy of my manuscript, and he read it and he said, yeah, we're gonna set up a book publishing arm and we'll just publish this. So that's how it came out. And then it was meant to be read on the universities. They have a radio station called Campus FM. And the actor who had chosen it to be read and serialized was stopped because of the offensive language in it, or what they deemed to be offensive. It was also stopped from being lent out in the libraries, in public libraries back then. We're talking about 15 years ago, the first time it came out. People could check it in the library but not take it home because it would be too damaging, I guess, to them. So that was and this was happening under a very conservative government, which ironically took us into the European Union. So it was a very paradoxical time where this was a government that had economic liberal values, capitalism, full scale, but the values of family, their views of gays, divorce, they kept resisting divorce until they were forced through a popular referendum. So that's the more or less the context of a very, I think, hypocritical, Christian conservative, ultra-Catholic administration, which also manifested its I think, fascist tendencies towards migrants, refugees, super pushbacks, lethal. That's more or less the background to it. But I think my position back then was quite unique because other books were coming out and didn't have that problem, so I was really on my own, and it felt like there was nothing to do, not much to do besides just talking about it. And fast forward, I think things have changed in a very confusing manner. So we've then had thankfully a change in government, but until this day we have a Labour government, which is this is where it gets confusing because we've had a rush of progressive laws, for example, when it comes to gay rights, civil marriages, not even unions, right? So we were one of the first, and probably still are, the top European country for gay couples to get married and get their, on paper, their civil rights. While at the same time, we have, I'm very confident in saying, the most corrupt administration in our history. We have an administration under whom a journalist was blown up 6 years ago, this month, Daphne Caruana Galizia, for exposing the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff's secret account in Panama, set up the day after they won the election. We have a government, a Labour government, which is similarly to the ultra-conservative government, pushing back migrants, refugees to their death in the Mediterranean, the same as the fascist Italian government that there is now under Meloni. It's the same. So it is a question of ideological confusion, but we are somehow freer in a way. Now my book, the same book of 15 years ago, censored by the Temple of Free Thinking University, is now published by a mainstream publisher. So it's gone a bit around full circle. And it is confusing, because we're like in this space where I think I'm angrier than ever at what's happening, and at the same time, there's this very superficial pink-washing and very, very, I think, superficial patina of freedoms. But we aren't free there, I don't think. I think we're in a very dangerous situation in Malta these days. And our democracy, I think like everywhere else, not just Malta, is receding. It's a continuous struggle, which it always is. I think we can never take it for granted. Freedom of speech is a work in progress. It's never a finished product. And that's a reason why I'm also active in our PEN Center in Malta with other authors and journalists, and defending as aggressively as we can our space, our freedoms, our rights, and against censorship, which is not as insidious or obvious as it was maybe 15 years ago, but it's happening in much more insidious ways. Being, for example, never having a chance to get funding, or not getting a job which you're entitled to in the government, in the cultural sector, or public broadcasting. I'd love to go back to Malta one day and lead our newsroom to investigate our government and our corrupt ministers. You'll never get that job unless you are actually part of the corruption. So it's I think it's very sad times we're facing, but it's also the time to take up arms.
Yeah, that's what you just said. I think it's really important to emphasize that writing is maybe a tool for change, would you say, in a way?
For sure, writing is powerful, and I think it does terrify people. That's why they blew up a journalist. So it can't be more obvious than that. Does it lead to change? When it comes to literature, I think my measure of that impact is if I made my reader, my anonymous reader out there, feel something, then I'm happy. That's what I'm meant to do. Societal change depends on a lot of other things. We have a stalemate in our political system where we have two major parties, for example, which have made sure that nobody else can enter into their playground, and that's a big stalemate because they control the laws, they can change or not the constitution. And we have to keep thinking. Can we force them through a referendum? Can we force them through mass protest? But where literature comes in, I think it's the touching the reader somehow and making them see, not necessarily for the better or for the worse, but see something which they have never seen before. Being in someone else's shoes. I want to feel the dilemmas of a young Nazi soldier being given orders which he never thought about. That to me is changing. That's life-changing. Or a Palestinian whom you might have always thought of as a terrorist, you see that he has a family and he's just trying to keep them alive. That to me is the change that literature can bring.
Yeah, of course, if he's a well-rounded character, then it makes sense, I would say. And maybe, Leanne, can you comment a little bit about this?
When Karl describes our situation perfectly, so I don't think I have, unfortunately, almost anything else to add to that. But when he was speaking about censorship and language, I think there are still some taboos related to language. So if someone reads something in Maltese, I don't know, some swear words or something like that, they might be shocked, but they read the same text in English and in Italian and they're not shocked. We're somehow used to that language. If a novel tries to be naturalistic in some way, then people are shocked. And I was thinking about When I used to teach at secondary level, Clara Zoppardi, you might know her, her novel for youths, Frape. I used to teach at a Catholic school, and once the librarian came to me and told me the book is banned because it mentions an undergarment and the word fuck. And I remember I went to the library and students were reading The Fault in Our Stars by John Green, where in the first chapter the guy is putting his hand, under her shirt, and they're standing against the church. And I remember I told her there are like 6 copies of that. I don't find it a problem, of course, but there are 6 copies of that book, going around the school. Do you know what's in there? And then I translated the first chapter, and I told her, does this bother you in Maltese? Like, in English it doesn't. So why should? So I think we're somehow still also battling not only themes that are a taboo to a certain extent, but also language itself and the way it is used. And I think sometimes we underestimate our readers in that sense. Even young children, what they read and what they don't read, my students, they don't really, they struggle with themes in the sense that when we speak, I don't know, about migration, they're not always ready to open up their perspective and think about us all as humans. So that is a struggle for them sometimes, because they are brought up in certain ways. And, well, like you were saying, then poetry, I hope that poetry touches them and they start to see a different perspective through that. But yeah, we do have our challenges, and, well, if you try to go against the grain and go against the system, like Karl said, in that sense, we all know what happened to Daphne, and that's really, really, really scary, I mean, I was in a position, I held positions within the public sector where sort of they tried to shut me up, and they told me, be careful, because, you have sort of this part-time employment with the government, so you really cannot speak against the government, and that's really scary, because I want to say what I want to say it the way that I want to say it. I don't want to be controlled,
I think it's also less of themes being taboo and more about our. I think there's a list of little things that make us Maltese in a way, that make the Maltese fabric. There's the Catholic superstition and confusion that comes with it. Because if you read the Bible, there's no taboo there. There's everything. There's incest, murder in the family, there's all the themes, So we have that in Maltese. It's been in Maltese forever, but there's no critical thinking about it. This is the church, so you accept it. And then there is, I think, a huge setback in our society is this great element of servility. People survive by appearing, not necessarily really being, but they have to appear to be servile to people in power, to people in authority. And I've seen that a lot in other Mediterranean countries, especially Arab countries. It's very similar, of automatic deference to the authority, although deep down you do what you want. Which leads us to a situation of amorality, because the church is telling you this and you have to appear to be doing this, whatever it is. The church, the Catholic Church tells us you can't have sex before marriage, but Malta is one of the most, as promiscuous as any other country, right? So it's this, I think, lack of being true to oneself, because there's an authority which you're not going to challenge, because somehow you'll need them. because they might give you a job or they might make you look respectable in your village. And this, I think, is also reflected in the way we treat literature. I don't think there's a taboo in itself.
I agree.
15 years ago, an explicit gay novel in Maltese would have been taboo. Today, it would pass with total indifference. You would get almost no reaction, except from another author who would think it's a good novel or a bad novel. But I don't think there would be any shock because of the subject matter.
If I might add to what Karl is saying, for a very long time, church in Malta was another political party. And that, I think, says a lot about our fabric, the fabric of our society.
Yeah, unfortunately, you always have to reposition yourself in a way.
There was it Mintof who said min mux mana kontra tagħna? There was this saying by a politician, I don't know, Adrian, if you can correct me on this, that said, whoever is not with us is against us.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow I think that this sort of has a ripple effect on a lot of aspects in our society. And sometimes it's not just black or white. There are...
And he was referring to the church.
Pardon?
I'm from Malta, he was referring to the church.
Min mux maħna kontra tagħna. But I think that idea, you know?
Yes,
sort of...
he also condemned the people from the other party. And the church condemned them with their death.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like that.
Thank you for this. Thank you for the comment. Can we maybe hear something now? Leanne, would you read something for us now? And maybe give us a little context about what are you going to read? What did you decide?
Can I read first?
Of course, yeah.
And then I'll say something afterwards about that. I don't really like to comment beforehand. So,
of course.
I'm not sure which one is this, but
Yeah.
thank you.
Sure.
Which poem is this?
The one that's showing.
It's in the order. Yeah, it's in the order. Yeah, okay. L-atrofija tal-ġerħiet jew saman weġġa ġewwa. Kull ġerħa f'ġismi tajta isem differenti. Kull ġerħa ġrat xi darba u mhux oħra. U ovvja daqs dal-kliem qisu sentenzi skomunikati. U ġieli l-istess ġerħa m'għandha l-istess isem bħala sfissija li taħkimna kull flaxija bħal darba dejjem tikber fuq sieqna l-leminija bħal dellirju li jassarna maż-żernieq. Jekk tibqa' tgħidu l-kliem atrofikat qaf tiffurmah. Kull ġerħa f'ġismi tajta isem differenti bħal dieħes għadu jawwar sa ma nweġġa ġewwa. Il-ġnien fix-xemx ta' Mejju jew rieħa mill-Majstral. L-ewwel. Darba ommi għalmitni nikteb il-fjuri fil-plural. Ħanaloqhom bejn il-paġni ta' kliem tmiem la m'hemmx ħajja tħuf fil-vini u l-eru ilhom li telqu l-petali fuqhom mafġin jispellu sillabi skjerati u jarmu fwejja immaljati modi oħra. It-tieni. Il-ġilju traxxinat bit-tewdin ta' ġimgħa oħra. Il-manjolja mitwija fil-qarsa bejn il-bejn. L-orkidea tistira minn bejn it-tinjiet. Il-tulipan jitħajjar isir il-warda, l-krizantemi mnixfina l-snin oħra. Il-ġizimina qed-tnilu ma ssibx tar fil-gladjoli u d-dali f'dal ħafna folji żarmati. It-tielet. Dawn il-fjuri ta' ommi li talmet tkabbarhom qabel kbirt jien wara li kabret lili sabel ġnien qed jistejqer fix-xemx ta' Mejju. Il-privileġġ tal-abjad jew aħna li ma ġejniex bid-dajsa. Immaġinawna ġejjin mill-vojt, mhux mill-bot, mhux minn pajjiż qed jaqa' biċċiet f'ħoġorna jitfarrak ma' kull ittra li toħroġ minn fomna. Immaġinawna bojot u immaġinawna hawn. Nirrepetu t-teoremi li tarfulna meta konna tfal. Immaġinawna kostellazzjoni stilel fidda u miġema waħda mexxin fit-triq ta' Sant'Anna mxekklin imqar mix-xejn, idejna f'idejn taħdejna qisna qatt ma konna nafu mod ieħor, qisu d-demm li jiġri fina bħal soffokazzjoni tnixxi fil-pori. Immaġinawna baleni li ma sirniex nafu qarni skata baħar arrestati bejn il-mewġa tross eżistenza ġdida u l-ħalfa tista' agnostiċi jekk trid fi kriżi li la taqbadna u lanqas tridna. Ma nafux ma jafux in-nies tal-artu lanqas xi jafu tqabadna mad-delużjoni jew il-preferenza l-affarijiet imdakrin mis-sodju jkanġi x'jiġri għada. Fir-rassa tal-jofroħ immaġinawna skomdi, aħna l-iskomdi fit-telqa tal-abjad jimla l-qala, kif ebda port jew vapur jew ċikonja ċinja tarbija ma taf li wasalna, kif il-poeżija tirrima nofs gost. Kif l-evakwazzjoni l-istess bħall-avvent tal-ilmijiet għad insiru nafu. M'hemmx mod ieħor kif tgħidu li aħna dawk li ma ġejniex bid-dajsa bil-vapur, biċ-ċatriet fil-qiegħ. L-ilmijiet ġejjin mill-bogħod biex isalvawna u l-ebda salvazzjoni mi se tikkurana.
Thank you for this. I think something really interesting happens, when you don't know the language. So I just got to enjoy the melody, the words. I think it's really interesting way to like meet a poem in a way. So maybe you can comment a little bit about your collection and your need to experiment with poetry.
Once I wrote a list about the things I would like to write about, and whiteness, the color white was one of them. So this project really and truly started off with my fixation with white, in the sense that white can be everything and nothing at once. It can mean so many different things. It has so many nuances and references in our culture, and not just in our culture. And a lot of poets in Malta mention the color white, but it's not just that. So really and truly it started off from there. I wanted to see where the color white takes me. Both in the cultural, societal field, so to say, but also personally. What does the color white mean to me, or what does it remind me of? And then I started to work with my childhood friend, Gioelea Galea, who's an amazing photographer. And we started to feed into each other's work. I mean, she started to look for white things. So as you can see, so this is the book, which is a box, so to say, and it is made up of different elements and parts. So there are postcards, there are transparencies with poetry and images. So as much as white can mean so many different things, we wished for the reader to make out of this book an experience of his or her own. And the poems that are printed in this manner, they all have a photograph. And what Gioelea did is that she went in really close with her camera to sort of distort the image in this sense. So we make out of it whatever we would like to make out of it as well. And then the music came in, Kenetsako's music, which is sort of an ambient kind of music. And this again ties in with the reader's experience. We wished for the reader to, I don't know, either read the poetry whilst listening to the music or try to interpret the image maybe without reading the poetry. So this is how it all came about. And at the end of the day, we tweaked our work according to what the other artists were doing, you know. So in my case, I had a skeleton of the work, but then I saw Gioelea's images and then worked upon them, you know, tried to explore the images through words. The same with music, and it all came together in that way. There was also an exhibition related to the project where people walked through these sort of rooms. And again, they could sort of form their own experience related to that work. So yeah, that's whiteness, Juda.
Yeah, that was really interesting for me, the way you thought about poetry, you know, in a experimental way, so it can give you some kind of experience. That was cool. Karl, can you maybe read something for us now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is a photo I took in 2018 in eastern Ghouta, that is just 10 kilometers outside of Damascus. And this is the site where for 5 brutal years there was a total siege by the Syrian regime on the people of eastern Ghouta, because they somehow sided with the opposition or they were just caught in the wrong place. And that meant that they were brutally bombed, they were cut off from essential supplies, food and water and electricity and everything. And in 2018, when I went, it was when the siege was lifted and the regime just took over the place. And I went there for work. There's a school just behind me from where I took this photo, which was bombed. A lot of the buildings were like when you cut a cake, you know, the facades were blown up. Many people died there. But the school reopened, half of it, because half of it was no longer there. And I was interviewing children, and we were helping them, the refugee agency I work with, we were helping them rebuilding their school, and they were extremely happy to go back to some kind of normality, even in a very abnormal place. But as I'm interviewing children and getting their take on things and life, I took a little break and went out, and I saw this man on his own walking through the rubble with his bicycle, probably his most prized possession left to him. And I took a quick picture and didn't think much of it. It's a bit like I said earlier, voices come back. Sometimes it happens also with pictures. When I go back home and I'm looking at what I got. And it was published, and it stayed with me for a long time. And it resurfaced when the war on Ukraine started, as you all know. And there was, rightly so, all this outpour of solidarity with Ukrainian refugees. And for some reason, this man came back into my head. What happened to him? And it just struck me, this two ways and two measures of how we look at humanity. We care about a white, blue-eyed Ukrainian, but this man will remain anonymous forever. I didn't talk to him, I don't know who he is, I don't know his name. So this is when I wrote this poem about, well, it inspired this poem, which is now the inspiration for hopefully a collection of works that I'm writing, poems in the voices. This is not in his voice because I haven't talked to him, so this is my take on, but every poem after it is going to be in the voice of people I've met and interviewed and talked to, and sticking to their voice as much as I can, of course, from my own privileged position. Fejn ħallejt ar-rota meta ħrabt? Ħallejt kollox warajk, ġarrejt kverta ftit ħriqi lil bintek, samti xmara taħt il-pont imġarraf. Imxejt fix-xita u fin-nixfa fuq l-art lesta tibilek, fuq ibħra kulur id-dlam, il-bot minn darek, il-bot minn fejn ħallejt kollox warajk. Iċ-ċertifikat tal-gradwazzjoni fl-arti mill-Istitut Tekniku, ir-ritratti kollha tal-familja inkluż tiegħek ta' 5 snin li jibes ġled blu, ir-rota ta' meta kont tifel u li żammejta biex tagħtiha l uliedek xi darba. Il-kollezzjoni tal-bolli, litri ta' mħabba li kitbitlek l-ewwel tfajla moħbija f'kaxxa ta' żraben. Bagalja li sifret miegħek u ma' missierek meta ma kellekx taħrab. Fejn ħallejt il-bagalja? Fejn hu l-bib tad-dar li sakkart? Ħriġt minn xi sqaq tal-belt il-qadima ta' Mowsul, jew ħadd il-baħar mix-xatt Ħudejda. Jew forsi għaddejt taħt il-barax żibel mitfuħ fi triqtek mill-aljeni tax-Xejħ Ġarrah. Żewġ mill-mini taħt l-art ta' Gaza jwasluk bħal il-farawn Eġizzjan. Jew forsi kont ftit iżjed qribna bħalna. X'kulur huma għajnejn bintek? Dan l-aħħar ġew ċorma minn Kiev, dawk jieħdu priorità, dawk iżjed bħalna. Dawk jeħtieġ jitlu. Erħila li sal-bieraħ konna ndaħlu biss in-nisa jaħdmu fil-klabs esklusivi ta' traffikanti bil-ġlek. Erħila li sal-għodu għadna nippruvaw nisolħuhom fil-kwarantina waqt li nbijaw il-passaporti lill-biċċiera biskiken is-serrati tad-deb. Fejn ħallejt ar-rota meta ħrabt? F'xi triq imħarta tripli jew f'xi belt ċivilizzata tal-Ewropa. Tifhem li dawn mistoqsijiet importanti, jeħtieġ nistaqsuhom. Tifhem li mhux kull min ħalla kollox warajh ħaqqu ħinna, hemm kwistjonijiet profondi taf inti, tippreferi l-kebab jew is-soppa tal-armla. Ir-rosti klub furketta jew taqbdu bidejk. Meta toqtol il xi ħadd rott is-sarib jew tgħid Allahu Akbar. Poġġi bil-qiegħda ħanieħdu ftit noti qabel nikkommettu ruħna. Mhux se ntawlu, illum tallimna nfittxu għas-sinjali tas-sikrana. Malajr se nkunu nistgħu ngħidulek l-atroċitajiet tiegħek u mhix denji tal-kompassjoni tagħna. Tifhem li sirna effiċjenti fil-kalkolu tal-proporzjon. Hemm apartheid u apartheid. Hemm dittatur u dittatur, hemm reżistenza u reżistenza, hemm qattil u qattil, hemm aħna u huma u inti u bintek. U l-formula li trid timtela u d-dettalji ta' ġiltek u familtek. U fakkarni fejn ħallejt ar-rota ma taħrab. This one is a very personal poem, I guess.
English newspaper, fast speaking English, etc. So the question is, which language do you really write here?
Yeah, I think when I said I wrote and write in English, there is always what you've just said, the realization that this is not really my language, and it was more out of pragmatism that I wanted to communicate, either because I was in love with someone or and I use it on a daily basis in my reporting, in my interactions. Maltese for me is the language that is coming from the stomach. It's where it's internal, and there was a moment, or there have been moments where I felt I was almost at a risk of losing it because I wasn't using it enough. I think now that I've moved away from the Middle East, where Arabic was almost a substitute for Maltese, and I was using it on a daily basis. Now that I'm in Kenya, I live in Kenya, in Africa, and I have a son of a year and a half whom I talk to in Maltese. I think now it's even more essential for me to use it in every way, in speaking in every possible way, every chance I get, writing it more, and also knowing that in spite of all the needs to communicate with the rest of the world, there's a lot I need to tell my people, myself, and my son. I don't know if this answers your question, but that's where I am right now.
Yes, okay. Well, I mean, it's not a problem in itself. Joseph Conrad was Polish. He wrote in
Absolutely.
rich
Absolutely.
English. Samuel Beckett wrote in English and French.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I know. But there's always the idea. Conrad, case in point, is the knowing that he's the outsider, using a language that isn't his, but he made his own and somehow. And I don't think I've mastered that level of English to say that at all. And I think I communicate best on. I can't say on the things that matter because my work matters. So and I communicate all the time in English and in Arabic. But there's something that I need to articulate better for the next festival about Maltese being it's almost material. It's part of my body. It's part of my. I mentioned the stomach because there's Maltese food. There's my mother's milk that I took, which is Maltese, and our kitchen was Maltese, and with all its idiosyncrasies, because it's Maltese as much as it is Italian and fish and chips and all that. But that makes it Maltese in a way, and that's I think what I'm still carrying.
Thank you for the comment and for the question. Do we have anything else you want to know? Yeah, sure.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for this. Yeah, really amazing. Sorry. A question for both of you. You agreed that the writing about something you don't necessarily have to experience it, but you have to. That is something that you know about, right? So, in a sense, I wanted to ask, how do you determine your positionality in something that you might have not experienced personally, and how do you decide to take up a certain space or a certain topic that you would want to write about, but you don't have a direct experience to it?
Maybe I can give an actual example. So was it the third? Yeah, the last poem that I read, it's entitled The White Privilege, and I wanted to write about immigrants. He said that he could hear the Mediterranean, you know, but the Mediterranean is not all sea and sand, but sadly lots of dead migrants. And I wanted to write that experience, but obviously I've never been in that experience. So in my case, in this case, you know, I spoke from the position of a very privileged person, whom maybe I will never get to experience what these people experience, and I feel super lucky that I have my home, that I have my food, that I have my space. So in my case, that's what I tend to do. When I write about experiences that are not really my own, I like to think of them though as experiences that I'm making my own, you know, by thinking about them, by living them in some way or another, by talking to people who have been through that experience. So I think in my case it is a question of perspective most of the time, and trying to play with that, so to say.
I think in my case it's quite an unconscious decision. It's not that I decide to write about the Middle Ages and research about it. I think quite automatically, maybe out of laziness or coziness, I write not what I experience, because I don't write just about myself, but about somehow things I know. And by know, I mean things that I've heard, listened to, seen, not necessarily having experienced them directly myself. I think the other subconscious consideration is it worthy of, does it tell a human story? And again, this is a very broad value, if you like, but possibly the journalist in me is looking for storytelling that touches, that can tell you something that is relevant, whatever, as hard as relevant. What's relevant is also very subjective, but to me is looking at. I mean, there's the fatalist in me which says everything has been said. I think I should just shut up and say nothing else because everything has been said. But then there is the other part in me which wants to, because if you then accept that, then I think you should also kill yourself, because then what's the point of just staying here? So then there's the other part in me which, you know, as long as I'm alive, I need to give my blueprint, put my finger on things, subvert them, turn them upside down, and speaking truth to power. So that's my personal decision in relation to the subject that I'm writing, which again means that as much as I've written poems about Palestinians, it also means, from my experience, also reflecting on what I think is wrong with also their society, if we get there, or about my society. So yeah, I think broadly speaking, truth to power, is it worthy of a human story, and what is my contribution to it? One of my favorite authors is José Saramago, Portuguese Nobel Prize winner in '98. And one of the things I love about him is the way he turns everything upside down. The irrelevant, the marginalized becomes the center of his story. and because of that, the story changes and history changes, and I'm very much influenced by that.
Yeah, we need to question everything. Are you happy with the answer? It's okay?
I hope you are.
Thank you for the question. Do we have some more comments or questions? Yeah.
Hi. So first of all, thank you. I'm Maltese living here, so it's nice to hear the language.
I recognize your face.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I wanted to first of all comment. I see a lot of frustration, right? There is a lot of frustration in writing, even the culture that we speak about every single thing, even if we're saying it in a light-hearted way. I feel as a Maltese person, there's always this underlying frustration. So, what would you write about to soothe this?
I don't see writing as a soothing experience.
Okay.
Like Anisnin said, we write to taste life twice. And then there's Hemingway as well, who says, how does he put it? Write till you bleed, as in that quote. I can't remember the words correctly. So in my case, if I'm in a bad situation, I think I would write even more about it and try to tackle it head on. Truth be told, in this sense, I'm really frustrated with the political situation, and I write about it, I comment about it, I protest about it, but I don't think I write about it enough in my poetical work, so to say. So if I had to do one thing, was actually to write more about that in order to bring it to the fore. It's a really good question. I have to think more about it, actually.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think there's a lot of soothing things out there, a lot of yoga and a lot of meditation, which I don't need to add to it, and that wouldn't be a valid contribution. I think that when someone can relate to what you write, and I feel a lot of anger, there's a lot of outrage, and I think we should be more outraged. I think the world is not a better place because we're not outraged enough at what's wrong with it. But when someone relates and maybe realizes that this is something that I'm not experiencing on my own, I think that's soothing. But it shouldn't be soothing that makes you sleep well at night. It should be soothing in the sense that we should discover solidarity. We should discover action. We should talk politics. We should talk action. We should talk protest, disobedience. Of course, there is writing that is soothing. I've just written a book for children, which is being used by my employer, the Norwegian Refugee Council, with refugee children who have been through trauma, through very bad experiences. And of course, my intention there was to first show them that they're not alone, that what they've been through, there's no shame in it, that displacement, migration is the most natural thing on earth. It's what every animal does because of different reasons. So that I think I hope is soothing for them, and it's addressed to them, but also to other children. But ultimately the point is not just to feel better, but in that case it's to feel part of a bigger humanity and try and get people to think that it's bigger than your little problem or your big problem, which you think was insurmountable. But overall, I'd rather be angry than soothing, with bad consequences for my health. But yeah.
Thank you for your
Can I say
question.
something about this? A quick comment. This is a kind of challenge I gave myself in recent years. Somebody asked me to write a poem about work, to celebrate work. And I thought it was really interesting. So the Karl Schembri in me, or the Leanne Ellul in me, went into protest mode. So the way we're exploiting Maltese workers, foreign workers, not well-paid workers, and all of that. But then I decided I didn't want to do that. I wanted to celebrate the sacrifice of a person who, against all odds, works and contributes to society. And at the end of it, I thought it was an even bigger challenge to write a poem which wasn't soothing, because there is pain in the Nepalese worker who has to leave his family or her family behind to come to a foreign country and work with a bad pay and to live without the private space that we all cherish. But at the same time, it was also a celebration of that sacrifice. I don't think it makes it unnecessarily romantic or anything like that, but I see an interesting challenge in choosing not to go into protest mode, which is what I normally